All right, let's just jump right in. Welcome to today's Explainer. We've got some seriously fascinating source material to unpack today, and we're going to take a pretty incredible journey. We are going to bridge two worlds that, at first glance, might seem like they have absolutely nothing in common. On one hand, we've got the super dense, highly theoretical realm of modern French semiotics, and on the other, the visceral, epic, and really ancient tales of the Greeks. So how on earth do those connect? Well, through the ultimate human puzzle, language and meaning.
Here is our roadmap for the Explainer today. We're going to cover the science of science, building a metalanguage, decoding ancient Greek, grammar as a map, and finally, epic tales unlocked.
Okay, starting with Section 1, the science of science.
Before we could even get to the epic history, we have to acknowledge just how incredibly complex language actually is. Take this quote from the translators of Algirdas Julian Gramos and Joseph Cortez's massively dense work on semiotics. They were trying to translate this super convoluted French syntax into English, and they openly admit it was basically a battle. They wrote, "Quarrels erupted, cruces were agonized over." I honestly love this because it proves that if world-class linguistic experts are struggling with language, it is perfectly okay if we do too. Translating meaning is just messy business, plain and simple.
So, to navigate all that messiness, we rely on semiotics. Try not to think of semiotics as just some dusty academic term, but rather as our ultimate framework. It's this really coherent theoretical architecture that studies language as a system of signs to decode meaning. It basically takes all these disparate partial theories from linguistics, anthropology, and logic and wrestles them into one consistent framework. It's the lens we can use to look at literally any text, whether it's modern or ancient, and figure out how it's actually working on us.
Moving on to Section 2, building a metalanguage. Here's a funny problem you run into when you study language. You have to use language to talk about language. When they were translating Gramos's semiotic theory, the translators had to make a really specific strategic choice. They chose to use the terms sender and receiver instead of addresser and addressee. Why does that matter? Well, because addresser and addressee were already super heavily associated with a completely different framework, the Jacobovsian theory of communication. If they used those words, readers would drag in all this baggage from that other theory. By adopting a distinct metalanguage, sender and receiver, they kept their analysis pure and untangled.
This brings us to a really cool concept called lexicographic bricolage. The translators of this semiotic dictionary actively admit that they consciously over-translated the complex French syntax. They intentionally simplified the style because getting a clear operational understanding across to the reader was their absolute top priority. It's this beautiful admission that a completely objective, neutral dictionary just doesn't exist in the humanities. There's always a human touch, right? A deliberate choice to prioritize clarity over a literal but totally confusing transcription.
All right, Section 3, decoding ancient Greek. Let's apply this science.
Now play detective with me for a second. Just like our translators had to adapt French to English, the Greek language actually adapted itself over time. It is fascinating to see how the acoustic signs of a language shift over centuries. We go from the highly formalized, incredibly complex vowel sounds of classical Greek straight into the 1st century AD Koine dialects. Koine Greek simplified the vowels, it shifted to fricative sounds, it basically adapted the signs for broader, much more common use across a huge empire. The signs evolved simply because the people using them were changing.
And when we actually translate these adapted Koine signs, wow. We don't just get abstract grammar, we get this vibrant, living window into daily life. This specific text reveals the incredibly diverse, everyday labors of ancient people. We see the merchant wandering the sea in ships looking for profit. We see the farmer laboriously plowing the earth with curved plows all year round. We have the artisan gathering his sustenance with his own hands, and the prophet, placed by Apollo, recognizing evils coming from afar. By just decoding some basic linguistic signs, the ancient world suddenly breathes right in front of us.
Which takes us to Section 4, grammar as a map.
So, if semiotics is our framework, the structural rules, the grammar, well, that's the engine. Consider these ancient Greek verb paradigms from the Athenaze readings. Specifically, we're looking at verbs like leo, phileo, and timao. Now, to the untrained eye, sure, this is just an intimidating wall of characters, but look at it through the lens of semiotics. These charts are the tactical arrangements of meaning. Changing just one tiny suffix, literally a single sign, completely alters the time, the subject, the entire reality of the sentence. It is the precise, almost mathematical architecture you need to construct deep historical meaning.
And what is the ultimate payoff for mastering all that complex architecture? We actually get to meet people. People like Dicaiaopolis the farmer, carrying his calf. He's this recurring central figure in our Athenaze translation exercises. By methodically decoding the grammar, Dicaiaopolis transforms from being a mere grammatical subject into a highly relatable human character representing the daily grind of the Athenian countryside. The grammar maps directly onto human experience.
Section 5. Epic Tales Unlocked. It's one thing to read about a farmer and his calf, right? That's everyday life. But when abstract linguistic competence transforms into visceral historical drama, what do these ancient signs actually say when the stakes are literally life and death? Let's take a look at some of the really intense historical and mythical stories locked inside these translated texts.
Here, we decode a myth where ignoring the signs brings about absolute catastrophe. This passage recounts the famous tale of Odysseus and his starving men. Despite very clear warnings, the men decide to hunt and eat the sacred cattle of Helios, the sun god, and the translation here is just incredibly tense. Helios prays to Zeus for vengeance, and he literally threatens to take the sun down into the underworld if he isn't avenged. The result? Zeus strikes Odysseus' ship with a massive thunderbolt, and only Odysseus manages to escape, clinging to the mast. It is an absolute masterclass in narrative stakes, and it's perfectly preserved in the ancient syntax.
Then we transition from myth to the very real and honestly terrifying hubris of kings. Take this famous historical moment from our texts featuring King Xerxes of Persia. When a bridge his engineers built across the Hellespont was destroyed by a storm, Xerxes was so utterly enraged that he ordered the ocean itself to be whipped and chained. He actually commanded his men to tell the bitter water that their master was punishing it. It's this unbelievable juxtaposition, arrogant human emotion raging against completely indifferent natural forces, captured forever in just a few lines of ancient text.
And all that hubris, it eventually leads right here to the epic naval clash at the Battle of Salamis. By patiently deciphering these specific paragraphs, we unlock the grand scale of a battle that legitimately decided the fate of Western civilization. We get to read how the Greek ships, who were vastly outnumbered, totally outmaneuvered the mighty Persian fleet in the narrow straits. You can almost hear the battle song and the sudden panic. And we read about Xerxes sitting up on a hill, entirely ignorant of the fact that chance and human courage were actively destroying his empire right in front of his eyes.
All of this, the ancient myths, the arrogance of kings, the massive battles that shaped our world, it is all locked behind a really complex system of signs. Which leaves us with a final, I think, pretty provocative thought. If we lose the key to a language's signs, do we lose its history? The tools of semiotics, the agonizing work of those translators, the rigorous study of Greek grammar, they aren't just academic exercises. Mastering the semiotic map is really the only way we keep human history alive, keeping it speaking to us today. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep analyzing those signs, and I'll see you next time.